The last page has been turned on my most recent read, and I'm currently enjoying a perfectly brewed, if not a little bit cold, cup of tea. I'm not quite sure how it's happened. I really don't know at all. But we're into the last week of December already. My advent calendar is nearly finished. That means no more daily chocolate. And the Christmas close down project at work will actually end on Wednesday, though we're not closing until Friday. In a week, you'll probably be sitting down feeling just a tad bloated and planning either your New Year's reading list if you're me, or what Keep Fit routine you're going to start. If you're anything like me when it comes to the Keep Fit side, the routine will be planned, started and abandoned by the second week of February. But hey, I'm being honest here, I'm particularly lazy. My Christmas presents are all wrapped and packed, the Yorkshire puds are baked and in the freezer, and I'm looking forward to a week off work. Well earned, but I still have this week to get through. Is anyone else already on holiday, or are they planning to leave work before Friday? If so, I am just a little bit jealous. Right now, I'm ready to tell you all about the book I've just finished. So here I am, no spoilers, opinion-filled, and ready to roll, but I have got a guest. All of which means it's time for the latest episode of Being Bookish. I'm your host, Ray, self-confessed bookworm, introvert, hermit, long-term depression sufferer, and ex-coffee addict. Join me on my journey through my ever-growing to-be-read pile and enjoy the latest of my 100% spoiler-free book reviews. This week I have a guest with me, and we're going to be talking about the first book in the Eisenhorn Omnibus by Dan Abnett. No, you didn't mishear me. I read a book in the extensive Warhammer universe, and it was my first one. So light a few candles, or perhaps just switch on that reading lamp, because of a bit of atmosphere is always a wonderful accompaniment to a reading session. And if your weather is anything like mine right now, you'll need the light to see anything on the page. Get yourself a fresh cup of something hot, which I'm going to be doing in a minute, or a glass of something chilled, depending entirely on when you're listening and your preference. And let's get started. I'm here today with Dev, husband of a friend of mine, and we are talking about a book series I had A, never realised was a book series, and B, had never even considered reading. But it was recommended, so I thought, okay, go ahead. And I have a lot of questions because I finished the book and I'm confused.
Well, I am very happy because I always welcome an opportunity to talk about Warhammer. And this is pretty timely because today we had that announcement that Henry Cavill is working with Amazon on a Warhammer film.
I was actually going to ask you about that because a friend of mine said, I just saw that Henry Cavill's got a new project already. Wasn't there already a film about Warhammer? So I had to think back for a moment. I said, no, that was World of Warcraft.
Yeah, yeah, a common misconception. Very different films or settings, I should say.
Yeah, I have to be honest, I'm not familiar with the setting of Warcraft either. So both new.
So tell me what you made of the book. So, or do you want to introduce the book even?
Yeah, the book
Sorry.
I read was the first in the Eisenhorn Omnibus. I believe it's called Xenos by Dan Abnett, and it came out in 2001, which feels really old to me. I mean, 2001 is what? It's 21 years ago, and it feels very recent. The book feels very recent in the way that it's written. That I did get some minor sort of hits back to Greek mythology, religion, and everything else with Midas and a few other character names. They felt very mythological in creation. But there was also that element of religious oversight. I don't know if I was misreading completely, but they were talking
Oh
about a
no.
book that had power and almost like witch hunts and things. If you were different, you were automatically hunted and considered an enemy of the state, Was I misreading or was I actually accurate?
No, you read that perfectly right. So it's interesting because there are often nods back to current day or even ancient history in Warhammer books because the Warhammer universe is set in our universe, but in the 40th millennium. And so there's often these kind of distorted rememberings of ancient philosophy that to them is a lot more ancient, and that's sort of often slightly misquoted or anything like that. And Warhammer 40,000 is heavily flavored by the events of the 30th millennium, the Horus Heresy. And sorry, I'm wondering how far to go into
Well,
Warhammer mythology
that's the
here.
thing. One of the things I actually made notes on was the Pontius. And when they first mentioned it, I thought, is it a thing? And then they were talking about it as though it was a person. And it was almost
Kind
like
of right.
this is holy. And all I could think was they've definitely got certain things mixed up with, because obviously Pontius Pilate was not someone considered great and nice if you look at our mythology or our Bible and our Bible tales, but they were almost treating it as though it's a relic to be treasured. So it was like, as you said, they got certain things mixed up.
Indeed. So there's a lot of kind of religious overtones in the 40k universe, and it really heavily contrasts with the 30k stuff because you have this character, the Emperor, who you will have probably seen references to in there. In that the Inquisition are essentially the direct arm of the Emperor. They have his full authority, and the Emperor is this figure who it did exist in the 30k mythology, very sort of powerful chap who unified all of the human cultures across multiple planets and was driving a secular vision for humanity. And it's not really a spoiler because in 40k you know it already,
Yeah.
but he gets killed, and well, his corpse is mostly on the golden throne, consuming 1,000 people a day to keep the Astronomicon lit. Anyway, that's going to sound like Greek to you, but what happened essentially in the wake of those events is he becomes deified, and the ecclesiarchy, who are essentially the church of the emperor, um, come into power, and the Inquisition, who, for people who aren't familiar with the Warhammer universe, are sort of like the FBI of space, but imagine they can be judge, jury, and executioner. They have ultimate authority. They can destroy planets just because they say so, and none of that will be questioned. So Eisenhorn is an inquisitor in one of the three branches, the Xenos branch, that's specifically dedicated to dealing with um, threats to humanity of an alien nature, for the most part.
Yeah, that particular bit doesn't it's not really made clear that that is his designation or his role until the end of the book. So I'm guessing it comes in as something before the book that I read.
No, actually. Well, yes and no. So, interestingly, the Eisenhorn books were the first Warhammer books I ever read, which is why I recommended them. And yes, you start reading, and you're sort of, it all sort of assumes you know what's going on. And slowly over time, you start to comprehend it. And he accumulates his companions and stuff over the course of the books. And you start to get familiar with it. But yes, essentially, Eisenhorn is kind of a gumshoe, a private eye, but with ultimate authority to do anything he wants, including execute anyone he wants on the spot or destroy millions of lives. Um, and his job is to root out enemies of humanity who often take the form of cults, who are doing all kinds of occult and arcane things that could be devastatingly lethal to billions of people across the universe, and he has to do whatever it takes to stop them, including lots of sneaky, you know, detective work
One
and
of the
murder.
things I noticed about him was it wasn't as though he was a superhero or anything, but he was quite well trained and almost superhuman in his abilities. And there's a mention of psychic powers and everything else. So I'm guessing that's something that's evolved over time. But then a lot of people don't like him. He's not exactly the most popular person on the planet at the same time.
No, there's a huge amount of politics in Warhammer 40k between the inquisitorial branches, between the Inquisition and the Ecclesiarchy, and the Ministratum, who are essentially the bean counters of the Imperium. And yes, he is a psyker. And a core concept in all of the Warhammer universes is simply that you have the universe of real space as we know it. And then behind that is a kind of mirror of all of the emotion uh, in uh, in the world and history called the warp, and some of that is sentient, taking the form of demons who are kind of created by the first time someone murdered someone, and some really ancient demons. And the warp is kind of a really abstract concept, but they can travel through it for faster than light travel, and it's basically hell. It's full of
Lovely.
demons that will eat your soul, and that's what happens to everyone you die. You don't go to heaven; your soul gets eaten by demons, and they're all aware of that. um,
Oh, here's your
and so,
fate.
yes, yeah, and so these heretics that are out there, these cults, are essentially trying to curry favor with some of the greater demons of the warp, and Nurgle and Slanesh and Khorne, who are all kind of different demons of gods, I should say, of various things, and they're trying to bring about their primacy in the real world.
I also noticed that there was mention of blank. There was
Yes,
that the girl that they have with them, she is a blank, and Eisenhorn seems to be not so much wary of her, but doesn't wanna spend any time with her at all. "Oh, she's a blank,
correct.
I don't trust her." Is that because she isn't like them, or there's the potential for her to be something different?
Yeah, blanks essentially are people with no soul. They are a blind spot in the warp. They are unaffected by psychic abilities and are kind of, if you imagine magnets, psychers are a positive, and uh, blanks are kind of the same. So he's very sensitive to psychic you know, disturbances in the warp, and she has none. So being around her is distinctly uncomfortable for him. And so, yeah, they're generally not liked by anyone. Their presence is typically perceived as negative.
So in a way, she's kind of like him because he's considered to be, "Oh,
A
no, we
freak.
don't want you around." Yeah, and she's considered the same by him, so it's almost the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah, kind of. Inquisitors pick up companions along their travels, and from all walks of life. And Bequin is one such. And the way she takes it, I mean, I believe in this. She'd sort of become a prostitute and had sort of resorted to all kinds of ways to get by because she'd been rejected in society. And it was only when Eisenhorn explains to her this is why, that she understands the reasons that she'd had a very hard time in life, and then decides to start embracing it. But as a blank, she can shield people from demons and things who can't use their psychic abilities to harm them.
Which would have been kind of useful when Eisenhorn was being tortured.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Kinda like,
exactly.
"You've got this power, you could have used it, but you didn't know."
Yeah, I mean, are you going to read the other books? I
I
don't.
will
There's
I
a
will do.
spoiler.
I actually started reading the next one. Have to be honest, I have got so many books that I need to read for other things that I'm like, I will read these afterwards. It's like I'm also a third of the way through the second in the in one of the series by Brandon Sanderson. So it's kind of like when I can read for pleasure, I will read those ones. Well, I would say they're not the books that I'm reading aren't not for pleasure, but they're for I have deadlines on them. So it's kind of like
No, no.
reading these, but it's interesting because I did start to read the next part of the book and it was it continues on almost immediately. So it's almost as though it may as well have been one book rather than three parts of, but I'm guessing because it was the first one was 410 pages, they needed to cut it somewhere.
Yeah, there's a lot there's a lot of Warhammer books out there, and I've read a lot of them. But yeah, the Eisenhorn books are particularly good. Dan Abnett, you mentioned as the author, is kind of very well respected because there are many authors that work together on the Warhammer books, and he's one of the sort of the top writers from the communities, the fan bases perspective, and he writes very well. At least I hope you felt that way.
Yeah, it
And
it was
he
well
puts it
written. It
together.
it pulled me in, but there were so many things I did feel sometimes like I was coming in halfway through a story because I didn't know the universe.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You kind of pick it up as you go, but the Eisenhorn books, because they're focused on the Inquisition, touch on a lot of things. Space Marines are a big one, and I think you only really see them briefly in
Yeah,
the first book.
you do.
Um, and they are a humongous part of the lore. They are essentially the reason the lore exists, which is Games Workshop wanted to sell little plastic army men and wrote some stories around it to build out, the fantasy behind it. And that has now evolved into several hundred books of fiction, and countless IP licenses out to games and potentially even a film, as we see.
And a TV show on Amazon, apparently.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they've got their own TV streaming service where they stream animations, some of which are very cool. So definitely some good stuff out there, and I'd be interested to see what you make of the whole thing, because what I like, you basically are reading the intro and starting to understand a little bit about what he does and who he's working with, and the remainder of the omnibus explores all of those relationships in turn.
And it's also the building of the world itself, because sometimes you can read a book and the world is so unconvincing, there's no history there or anything else, and when you've got all of the obviously, you said that the 30th or the 30,000th is very, very different to to the 40K. So there is that building of the world, the history behind it, the religious, the secular, the government officials. I mean, the whole emperor sounds very Roman because the Roman emperors used to believe they were descended from the gods. So
Yeah.
worship me, I am a descendant of, in that well, obviously in the Roman case, it would have been Jupiter.
Yeah, so the funny thing is the emperor was kind of the opposite. He said, "Don't worship me. I'm not a god." In fact, he destroyed an entire city because one of his sons, the Primarchs, began to sort of create it as a place of worship to him, and he turned up and destroyed it with spaceships and made them all kneel in the dirt and
But
said,
then it
"Nope."
kind of backfired when he died.
Well, a little bit. When his Primarchs, who are essentially created from his genetics, and then the Space Marines are then created from theirs in tens of thousands of superhuman soldiers who shoot rocket-propelled grenades for bullets,
Fantastic.
and essentially the emperor's reign was the golden age of man, or it was supposed to be, and it all just went a bit Pete Tong, and it's sort of a tragic thing where in 40k really it's beyond redemption, and it's staving off the inevitable constant decay of the imperium of man, which, as you've seen, has devolved into superstition, and bureaucracy, and people are just living to try and feed this machine of
So it's very
war.
much the Middle Ages.
Yeah, that's a good point actually. So it's very much like that. I hadn't thought about that.
The superstition, the religion, the rule by the army or the armed forces, very,
And the
very much.
church,
Yeah,
yeah.
and the yes, and the church, very much the Middle Ages. It's interesting to see how it's that element of, oh, it's going to come around again, because it's that cycle of, and the thing is we see that in real life with, sounds strange, cycles in music, fashion, film even. Everything comes back around, and the same is probably going to happen for religion and culture in general, which is kind of scary.
Yeah, I mean, in a weird way, the Imperium of Man in the 40,000th universe year is probably not like an optimistic view of what humanity could be.
Yeah.
In that we'd
Here's your
survived
future.
long enough, yeah, we'd survived long enough to explore the stars, but then failed miserably to work together. And so yeah, it's grim dark is the term that was coined by them, and has been used in lots of other settings. In that it's all very bleak, it's all very grey and kind of miserable, but within that you get these little pockets of hope and goodness, and the earnest desire to do the right thing. And it's these kind of stories that pop up, and sometimes the tragic failures um, that I really like about it.
Are there multiple characters like Eisenhorn? So you have him as the central character for this omnibus, and then someone else takes over, or does he carry through the story?
So actually, this series was expanded. There is a character that you meet briefly. There's a big procession where you've got these titans walking down this big avenue. I don't know if that was in the first book or not.
I'm trying to
And
remember. There
essentially,
were a few
there
things.
were a bunch of Class A psychos who were in containment, and bad things happen. But one of his proteges is severely injured, and he has his own series afterwards.
One
So
of, oh, are
basically,
you talking about when they're almost taken to a coliseum to fight for their life against the demons?
man, it's been so long since I read this book. I should have read it again. I was so sure I'd remember all of it.
Yeah, there is a moment where after he's been captured and tortured, they're all sent into this, basically a coliseum, kind of like the Romans, as we've said many times, it has similarities, and he is they are fighting for their lives against these demon creatures for entertainment.
Ah, no. So this might have been later on. So the chap I'm talking about is Gideon Ravenor, and this
Yeah,
was
he's not.
the procession on Thracian Primaris, and that's a pretty cool bit.
There have been
I won't.
mentions of Thracian, and I think that that's where he was headed.
Okay, there we go. Second book then. So you'll
That's where he
meet
was headed at the
the
end of the
next
book.
character. He's quite a small character in the Eisenhorn books, but he is his interrogator, which is essentially like his kind of apprentice, I guess,
Yeah.
who's studying to become an inquisitor. And so he carries on the story, and then Elizabeth Beckwin also has her own series as
They have
well.
mentioned
So
her several times.
yeah, so she's our blank,
Yeah.
and so a lot of the characters have kind of spin-off bits, and they're all very good. I haven't read the Beckham ones, but the Ravenor ones are very good. And then there are loads and loads of different series that focus on all kinds of sort of pivotal characters in the Imperium, whether that be Space Marine captains or ship captains, ship mistress, Solara, all of these incredible things going on.
Rather than there being a central human or entity, the universe is the entity, it's the character.
Yeah, so you pick out bits within it. The Night Lords Omnibus focuses on one of the traitor legions, the Night Lords, who are essentially space terrorists.
Nice.
Who that even when they were the good guys, they were space terrorists. They'd turn up. If you wouldn't join the Imperium, they would skin your children alive in front of you and murder everyone. And then basically the idea was the next guy would definitely join the Imperium rather than resist. Um, but
You seen what
their
happened to
story,
them? Are you sure you wanna do it?
Yeah, so they're the whole thing was terror tactics, but they turned traitor in the 30K universe, and so by now they're very much traitors. And their omnibus focus around one particular space marine, his servant, and a navigator that they pick up, who is the only psyker able to pilot their ship through the warp at that time. So they're kind of scavenging around as one of these scattered traitor war bands. So you get all these little stories that pop up, and they usually focus around a few characters. Some of them conjured up in thin air, some of them who've been in the lore for a long time. And you've got the Horus Heresy series, which takes you all the way through the entire Horus Heresy, and that's about 50 books long.
Well, that's
And
all based on, that sounds like it's focused with an element of Egyptian mythology.
Yeah, you'd think so with Horus,
Yeah.
but no, Horus just happens to be the War Master, the favored son of the Emperor, and he's the one that turns traitor and gathers other Primarchs around him and wages splits the Imperium of Man in two and essentially opens up humans to the perils of the warp and begins this massive decay. So that's a really cool story, and it's just nearly finished. So it finished the Horus Heresy, and then they opened up the Siege of Terra series, which is 10 books long, and
So
the
that was, you
final
say that was
books are
50
coming out.
books?
Yep.
What?
And the Siege of Terra books are very awesome, and I think we've got the penultimate one coming this year, and then the final one the year after, and then that's that whole thing done. So we'll finally see committed to print some of these events that have been in the lore for 40 years or more.
So do you play the games as well as
Ah, hell no. No, I play the video games. I don't have time to paint miniatures as much as I'd like that, but the idea of the tabletop game doesn't appeal to me. I don't think you need to be like a basement nerd or anything like that to enjoy this kind of thing, but I'm not particularly into the tabletop. I love the lore and I love video games, so I will when I see the two connected, I will absolutely get involved there.
so it's more the storytelling rather than
Oh yeah.
creating the story for yourself, which is I'm guessing what you do, kind of like Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, yeah, kind of. I mean, the tabletop involves a bit of both. You can build your own kind of lore around those, but for me, I think I love the scale of the universe. Everything's huge. It's not tens or hundreds. It's thousands, millions, billions of things at stake, and so when something doesn't work out, it really has huge impact and consequence. And when you see people almost manage to save everything and fail, the impact of that is so much bigger. That's what I really like. It's really hard hitting when it's like it's not like, oh, I almost met my love of my life, but I didn't tell her and she left. It's like I almost averted crisis that would have literally saved mankind, but I didn't.
Oh,
And
great.
so the entire fate of man rests on like all these things, and so it's like these huge battles and all this stuff, and
Actions have
it,
consequences on a larger scale.
yeah, and the everything is super in it. The soldiers are superhuman, and the Primarchs are even more so, and the Emperor is even greater. So it's
So they've evolved, it's humanity evolved to not the next level, but the level after that.
yeah, well, not even evolved really. I mean, they're genetically enhanced. So the Space Marines are children who are put through these awful trials, and the ones that survive, literally, are surgically implanted with these extra organs and pumped full of hormones and genetic implants and things like that. And then they basically turn into these super soldiers who are then indoctrinated and trained, and they're smarter, stronger, bigger, and then are essentially soldiers of man. And a lot of their stories are quite interesting because they explore this concept of we're weapons, and they know that, but then what happens when there's no war and can we be more than just that? And this idea of like, do we care about the people that we're supposed to protect anymore? Some of them do, some of them don't. All these different ideas of what it is to be. Are they still
So they're
human?
sort of like Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes super serumed, but more Bucky Barnes than Steve Rogers.
Um,
Implanted, my brainwashed,
Kind of.
ordered to do things because that's what they've been created for.
Yeah, sort of. So yeah, imagine Steve Rogers, except there are tens of thousands of them, and they're all sent off into space to murder aliens, and their culture is all about primacy in warfare, and uh, and it's easy for them to forget when they're destroying cultures and annihilating planets that
Genocide is simple.
yeah that they're still human, or I mean, are they even still human? And these sort of 8-foot super soldiers wearing huge armored plates and stuff. So
Yeah, there's that question of what is the definition of that is no longer human?
yeah, where's the line? That's exactly it. And so there's lots of explorations of that kind of concept, and people sort of deciding, maybe some of these aliens aren't so bad and we shouldn't murder them all, and other people who think that's heresy and they should be shot for that. Yeah.
But doesn't the isn't the question then raised, if we're no longer human, are we not alien?
Well, that's a good point. I'm sure it's come up in one of the books, where someone says, "How far are we from the human?" But I think no one would question that the Emperor's plan was right. I think the key thing with Warhammer to remember is there are no good guys. Like, everyone is a shade of gray. There are other races that feature heavily in this. Um, I think you might even bump into the Eldar, who are basically space elves. They are an ancient race, typical elf stuff, who fell
Yeah.
from grace, and their society is dying. It's very Lord of the Rings elves, but they're very vindictive and sort of superior and holier than thou. Um, and some of them,
You could argue that the Lord of the Rings elves weren't exactly nice.
no, in fact, yeah, they had their own faction differences as well. You've got, these. If you want Egyptian, then you've got what are essentially these space skeletons. This race of people who traded their humanity to become immortal robots, and they've been around for millions and millions of years, long since humanity, before humanity even evolved. And then they wake up from this self-induced coma, and they want to basically get rid of the vermin that are infesting the world. But they also don't like the warp,
And
so
humans are the vermin.
they are. Everyone is the vermin. But the one thing they also really don't like is the warp, because they don't like demons and things like that messing around with their shit. And so, in a weird way, they become these sort of uncomfortable allies with the with the humans. uh,
It's like, you're the vermin we want to get rid of, but there's something worse.
yeah, you've got the Tyranids, who are probably the worst of everything. They're basically space insects, but they just devour everything, turn it into biomass, and make more of themselves. And they are just plowing through the galaxy, eating everything, and leaving literally no molecule of organic material left in each planet they pass. And they're probably the greatest threat to the Imperium. And you have the orcs, who are very much like orcs in Lord of the Rings, except they like big guns, and everything they make is like ramshackle and shit. But they just want a good fight. They're very kind of funny. They're almost the comic relief. They don't give a shit what's going on as long as they're kicking the shit out of something.
Lovely. That's the thing, that I think every single fantasy and science fiction pulls on something that came before it. And obviously, Lord of the Rings is much older than Warhammer. So it's going to have been influenced to a degree by what came before, whether that's Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Lord of the Rings, or anything else.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things, is you can kind of pick your you can pick your kind of your favorite thing from it and go with it. So if you like uh, Egyptian mythology, then you've got the Necrons, the sort of space skeletons I was talking about, who basically turn themselves into
Yeah.
mummies on purpose, and now regret it immensely. You've got the orcs who are just sort of out for a good time. They're very funny and kind of not very complicated creatures. You've got humans, if you're into space fascists, who are really could redeem themselves but just never do. Um,
I love it. I love that. They're the space
oh,
fascists.
they really
Are
are.
you meant to are you meant to sympathize or identify with any of them?
That's the thing, right? Some of them are good, um, but as a whole, I mean, they're basically trying to, you know, it's my way or the highway for the entire universe, and especially in 40k, it really is just pure fascism, and propaganda everywhere, and their iconography, the eagle and everything like that is sort of Roman, but feels very kind of
Yeah.
Nazis, Nazi style stuff going on.
Which is that's the thing, I mean, the eagle was also used as imagery for the Nazi regime.
Yeah. So, I mean, the point is the Imperium are the closest thing you've got to a good guy because we're the humans. But the point is, it's all about perspective. You might identify more with them because you're one of them, but that doesn't make them the good guys at all. And, you know, there's lots of the Eldar who could be considered more good guys, or even the Tau, who are like a new race. They're more like space communists, where it seems like they're all out for good, but there's some weird shady stuff going on. They're kind of new to the universe and all this crazy stuff. So you can really just pick your faction and read a shit ton of stuff about them. I really think there's something for everyone in there. There's a smidgen of
And does it
romance.
matter where you start?
Uh, it depends.
Really?
I think I generally say people like start with the Eisenhorn novels because you touch on a little bit of everything throughout that omnibus.
Yeah.
You meet some space marines, you see some titans, you meet the Mechanicus, who are like robot worshippers, um, and you meet some Eldar. You see a fair bit of stuff, and you understand the politics and all this other stuff that's going on, and then from there you can branch out, and usually from there, I'll say, like, read the Horus Heresy so you understand the whole context of the universe. Um, and then from there, it's
But
like,
that's a big investment if it's 50 books plus another 10 and it's still not
if you don't
finished.
like the first couple of books, then you're probably, you're done. But if trust
In the
me,
wrong place.
I started reading them and then I just never stopped. I haven't had time for other books. So I really need to branch out.
That's the thing though, once you find something you like, I mean, I am the same. If I find a genre I like, I will devour the back catalogue because I get so absorbed in the writing, the storyline, the concept that I can't see beyond it.
Yeah.
And I force myself off that path, otherwise I'd never read anything else.
Well, that is the danger with Warhammer. Yeah, if you finished a book and, or a trilogy or whatever, like I really loved, there's this series of books that started called The Prince of Thorns, real kind of anti-hero, post-apocalyptic kind of thing. And I just loved this main character so much. And when I finished the trilogy, I was gutted because I was like, that's it. And I think a lot of people who love books know that feeling. And the thing I love about Warhammer, I never get that feeling. I've still got 100 plus books that I could read. There's more coming. They're coming out faster than I can catch up with them. And so like I love that there's not really a way for me to run out of this world that I love. There are certainly genres of it that I get bored of, but I can switch. If I'm sick of what
Yeah,
is often referred to as bolter porn, which is like space marine battle stuff. Yeah, it's not
okay.
actual porn. It's just like
I was for a moment, I was thinking my mind was going, "Do I really wanna know which direction this goes?"
no. When people say bolter porn, what they mean is kind of gratuitous, glorifying space marine guys, having cool battles. Like eventually, that can get a bit old, and that's when I switch over to something a little bit more cerebral. That's more about politicking and things like that in the Inquisition, or something more nuanced, or I switch to a completely different race who've got a totally different perspective on the world, different culture, different background, and everything that goes with that. Um, so you can mix it up without ever leaving the universe, and that makes it quite hard to want to read something else.
And to leave the universe. So what
Yeah.
made you, because everybody has that starting point. You said that the Eisenhorn Omnibus was the first books that you read of the series. What made you pick them up in the first place?
Um, so I'd encountered some of the art, and a colleague of mine when I was at university was reading these books when we worked at a Curry's together. And I was just like, oh, I was looking for something to read. I didn't really know what to pick up, and I was like, nah, that sounds kind of cool, space sci-fi, and it's very violent and grim and dark. I don't like things that have a happy ending because it always feels like a cop out to me. Um, Not everything has to be a bad, sad ending or whatever,
No.
but it always feels like it's almost patronizing, because life often works out in the gray area. It doesn't always work out roses. It's usually there's some kind of compromise. Maybe something works out, but not everything. And I was
Yeah,
kind of tired of
if
that.
you want the happy ending, read a romance.
Yeah,
That's what I do when I need I've had a bad day and I need a happy ending. It's immediately go to pick up something off the bookcase that is a romance, because I'm not gonna be sitting at the end of the day going, "Oh god, life sucks."
yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Happy endings don't make me feel much because they just feel like, ugh, you see them everywhere. Like, I think films, especially, they need to be brave to end on a down note. I remember feeling that way with Avengers: Infinity War. The snap at the end, 50%
Yeah.
of the. I thought that was a great way to end it. And the only thing that pissed me off was I knew they'd turn it around. Everyone would come back eventually, and I thought, man, that would have been such a poignant moment, except for that. And that's what I really like, is like when things don't go well, they hit you harder because it feels more real than everything turning up roses. And you're like, yeah,
But then, spoiler alert, you still lose people at the end of Endgame. And it was the one person. I'd have been fine, I think, with losing quite a large number of the characters, but you lost the one that started it all, and it was like, "But I didn't want that one to die." I actually, when I went to the cinema and saw it, that no joke, there was a girl behind me scream crying as they showed his funeral. It was like, "Oh my god, no. Please show some
yeah,
dignity.
they
Leave
milked
the
that.
room."
They milked that. But you know what? That was a good moment. But I also thought that they could have stopped at the end of that, and that would have been like a real gut punch for people to be like, "Holy shit! They just killed half the characters off." Like that would have been serious business. So I mean, like, I don't think what they did was wrong, but I like films that end like that surprise you. I think that's why Game of Thrones was really popular, was because when the Red Wedding hit, people were like, "Holy shit! They just killed the main character," or what they thought was the main character. And I love things that surprise you like that. Where you just don't
But
know.
they did that with Blackadder Goes Forth.
Yeah,
They ended that as they were going
over the top. Yeah,
over the yeah,
yeah.
that's how they ended it. So there was that, are they gonna survive? Are they not? And there was nothing afterwards.
Yeah, and I love that. So that's why, like, they could have all gone home and somehow got off the line, and that would have felt like a cop out. And that's what I mean. I like the Warhammer universe because it never does that to you. Like sometimes the people you like will win, but it's always with losses, with compromise and stuff like that. And you never know, like, you know, it's always a small victory against impossible odds elsewhere. It's just one small battle in a huge war.
But then there's also that, because there is such an incredibly large world, they've got, when that finishes, it's not a case of we've lost, as it would have been with Avengers, "Oh, we've lost our moneymaker."
Yeah, well,
And I
exactly.
think that is big drive for that kind of thing. If you've got everything to lose when it comes to the bank balance, you are going to look for the easy way to fix it so that you can still make the films. Whereas with the Warhammer books, they've got so many different paths to go down. They're never going to run out of anything.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are some heavy hitters. So a lot of the Primarchs, who are kind of really the closest thing you get to main characters in the whole thing. If you read the Horus Heresy, it's all about the Primarchs. They've all got very different personalities and
They're
legions.
the Emperor's sons, right?
Yes,
His
his
genetic.
genetic creations that he refers to
Yeah.
as his sons, and they call him his father. They've got lots of daddy issues. Um, they're all really cool characters. You've got like the Khan, who's essentially a sort of Mongolian warlord, and they all are influenced very differently, and so they're like main characters, and a lot of them died, turned traitor, and turned into demons, um, or disappeared off in search of so and so, and never to be seen again, or whatever. And they've brought a couple of them back, uh, and that's pretty big because you can only do that once. uh, so they're kind of that's how they're turning it up to 11. One of the Primarchs was fatally wounded but held in stasis for 10,000 years. And with the help of some Eldar, which is very unheard of for the Imperium to work with the Eldar, they bring him back. And he's now running the Imperium of Man in current day lore. Um, and that's pretty like that's huge news. Oh my god, a Primarch is finally back because all the Primarchs disappeared for 40k. There's none of them in the Eisenhorn books, but if you read the books that are coming out today, then there are Primarchs, or one of them, and there's lots of sort of other uh, things like will they bring back another Primarch? So yeah, they've got tons of ways that they can bring out new stuff. And of course, that makes the money because then they can release new models for it that they can sell. It's all tied in with that new IP that they can
Yeah.
license. So, from a commercial perspective, there's a lot going on there.
That was one of the things I mentioned to Lorraine was they've opened a Warhammer store in my local town, and I noticed it. I'd never seen it before, and I went into town a couple of weeks ago, and I passed it, and it was open, and all I could think was, "Isn't that the books?"
Yeah, that's it. So, the only time I'll ever cross their threshold is to see if they've got any of the new books because they're less likely to be in WH Smith's or anywhere else that you might shop. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of stereotypical nerds hanging out in there.
Oh
But
yeah,
you never know, you might meet Henry Cavill, picking up the latest box set, Custodes figurines. So,
yeah, because he's a massive fan of Warhammer, isn't
yeah,
he?
he is, and very publicly so. One of the few kind of celebrity advocates out there. Vin Diesel is another one. There's a lot of people that grew up playing Warhammer, and their whole marketing strategy is to hook kids, and then those kids come back 30 years later with money, and then start plowing it into the hobby. That
Yeah,
is,
nostalgia.
yeah, they're not looking to get kids into the hobby to try and get them to start spending money. They want to get the kids in so they come back later. They're very much a long game business.
Which is why the books are, I suppose, so valuable, because the books can maintain the interest while they're building their bank balances.
Yeah.
That sounds so cynical.
Well, honestly, it is a business. I love the universe they created, and actually, I mean, there's a lot of business practices that people would disagree with the Games Workshop, but goddamn, they make some good books. I like the art as well, and what's interesting is I like some of their stances on things. Like the things I like a lot about the Warhammer universe. There's not a whole lot of romance. What there is more about the connection between people and less about kind of love. Um, and women are not sort of scantily clad, barely covered their boobs armor figures. They are badasses. Lotara Saren is a good example of that, who basically stood up to one of the Primarchs and murders worlds. She's like violent. The Sisters of Battle, who are basically nuns with guns, are pretty rad. So you get these like really cool, strong female characters, and I think anytime you hear like strong female character, you feel like that's code for kind of a bitch, rubs people the wrong way and stuff. And I think Warhammer actually does
It's a stereotype.
it is, and I hate it in film. Like, I think there are amazing strong female characters, and they should be strong because of what they do, not because you say that they're strong. So like Linda Hamilton in Terminator, Sigourney Weaver in Alien, classic, awesome female leads.
Yeah.
And I think Warhammer actually writes some really good female characters that are strong for their own right and dangerous and rad. And it has nothing to do with them being women. They're just awesome characters. They just happen to be women. And that is my favorite kind of representation of women in
Yeah.
material.
That is a good representation of women, because there is always going to be, as we've said, the stereotype of, oh, she's strong, therefore she's emotionless, heartless, and nobody will ever like her as a person. Whereas you have got, as you said, Sigourney Weaver, Linda Hamilton, and there have been loads of strong female characters who've been portrayed really well. And then there are others that are that stereotype of, oh, which boy am I going to choose?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, don't even get me
I'm such a
started.
strong woman, except for this man who finally swept me off my feet. Ugh, don't make me sick.
Yeah, precisely, which is exactly what the more, it sounds bad, the more modern YA female character has been designed to be. Because you look at the Hunger Games and Twilight and all that, I'm not denigrating them. They are well written to a degree, but the characterization is so stereotyping.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that like Hollywood just can't resist making sure that they've got like very good looking cosmetic battle damage if they're in a kind of fight scene, Captain Marvel kind of shit. And, they always have to look pretty while they're being badasses and stuff. And I think, actually uh, being a badass is messy for a lot of things. And
Yeah,
if you treat female characters differently, then you're doing it wrong. Uh, you should be allowed to get ugly.
but they do, it doesn't pretty sells apparently.
Yeah, it does, but it's boring. I think more people would realize that. But yeah, again, I think Warhammer Universe does a good job of that, and older characters as well. Like some of the characters are hundreds of years old. You get some old ladies who are kind of like generals and things like that, who are pretty badass, cowing space
It's that whole
marines.
experience thing though, isn't it? If you value the experience, whereas, oh, they've just joined, but their dad was such and such, so they are in charge, but they've got no clue. Whereas you've got the experience behind them. And you get that from Eisenhorn. I didn't get the impression that he was young.
No, he's not. So the Inquisition are privileged. I mean, they've got a huge amount of wealth backing them, since they basically can do whatever they want. And they have, you might hear occasionally Juvenat treatments referred to in the book, and they're essentially
Yes.
plastic surgery, but like for the whole body, not just the exterior. So I think by the end of some of the books, they're all looking pretty good, even though they're passing 300 years old or whatever, 200 years old. uh, and that's because of that. And some people kind of go overboard, some don't, so they can kind of extend their lives. But yeah, Eisenhower's been around the block, all right.
Yeah, I got that impression that he was probably what you'd say, I suppose, he's a Sam Spade rather than a bright young thing.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, he's and he's got a really good character arc. Actually, he starts out pretty hard line, and the fine line for an inquisitor is often you in sort of other lore as well. You hear about radicals and sort of more conservative inquisitors. The more conservative ones are like, nope, these are the rules. I'm going to enforce the shit out of them, and will they're often sort of looking at each other to see who's straying too close to the sun. And then you get the other ones who are like, yep, I am going to get a demon and harness it and use that to kill other demons. And other inquisitors might take umbrage with that. And
But that's kind of what he's, you do get the feeling he skates a little bit close to the sun with the way that he does things, but he gets them done. And maybe that's why people are a bit more intimidated
yeah,
by him.
and that would be his justification. And so you'll see, if you do carry on reading it, you'll see him pass through various character arcs. They added a fourth book onto the trilogy where he's kind of an old dude, and he's properly fucked up by then. But like, there's he's a badass character who doesn't fuck about, and a Sam Spade. That's a good example. Good analogy.
Well, he was a detective that never followed the rules, but he always got the stuff done at the end of it.
Yeah, yeah, he's not quite a radical. There's some of them that go a little too far. Um, but yeah, he tries to toe the line without necessarily crossing it.
Which isn't a bad thing when you're trying to get stuff accomplished in any way. With the announcement about Henry Cavill, though, which story arc do you want them to tell, and who do you think he'd play?
Now that is hotly debated across many Reddit forums, and so
I've seen it's been hotly. I was looking it up today because, as I said, I got a message from my friend at probably 3:30 saying, "Oh, Henry Cavill's already got a new job."
yeah, so that I mean, long before this announcement, people have sort of said, what character would what actor would you cast as these characters? Who would play each of the Primarchs, and obviously when Henry Cavill announced that he was into Warhammer, people were, could he be the Emperor and things like that. Um, it's a toughie. I mean, he plays Custodes, so I'd be kind of interested to see him play like one of the sort of more senior Custodes. They're essentially the Emperor's bodyguard. They're like Space Marines, but instead of mass produced, they're kind of more uh, handmade,
Unique.
and so they're all a bit special. And I think he'd be a good character there. But I mean, there's a lot of roles he could fit into. There's a lot of kind of like hench, you know, serious face dudes in the Warhammer universe that he could fit into. He could be an
But
inquisitor
which
or whatever.
but which story arc would you like to see told? Given you've read so many of them, which one would you like to see Amazon go, right, we're going to spend millions on this, kind of like they did with the Wheel of Time, and this is what we're doing?
Uh,
It's a
it,
killer question. I love doing those.
it is a tough one. Honestly, I mean, like, if I thought like they could pull it off, like the Horus Heresy would be the ultimate one, because it's like such a cool story. Like people just wouldn't see it coming, and then the just watching everything go wrong and the stories, but it would be too big, too big for a
Yeah,
film.
that one's, if it's 50 books, they'd have to cut so much out to make it
I mean,
palatable for the masses.
there's a lot you could cut out and condense, but there's lots of small like that you get these like compendiums. They're like little like groups of short stories. Some of which are
Yeah.
rad, but are completely unnecessary to the whole story arc. Um, but no, realistically, something like the Eisenhorn series would be a really good fit for a TV show, I think. Um, but you'd need to find a way to contextualize the whole universe that quickly. That's difficult.
Mm,
Um, I mean, the opening pages of all of the Warhammer books in 40K at least have that same opening about the setting the scene for Warhammer. Where
yeah.
everything is war and the laughter of thirsting gods and stuff like that. I That's not a bad way to set it, but I think like that would be a pretty cool one because I can see like a few set pieces in the series, but a lot of it you could do with the sort of technology we have today, without it being like actually impossible to do. But realistically, like some kind of cool Space Marine battle, that would be cool. Give me some Space Marines. There's a very cool series that Games Workshop kind of nicked. A YouTuber, this one dude, animated and did the sound design for everything. This project called Astartes, who are the Space Marines, and Workshop basically roped him into their animation projects. And for anyone who's interested, Warhammer Plus, their series, has it on there and is an incredible example of what um, what it could look like. So that it's not like there's no one has done this before. There's plenty of people who could make incredible stuff, but it fits CGI better than live action, I think. But when you've got human characters, then it starts to make more sense.
Yeah, and that I think that's the thing with that kind of project. If they really want to capture the attention of people who aren't necessarily familiar with the IP or know it in any way, they need to go for a big name and a story arc that's going to capture their imagination, I suppose.
Yeah,
Hence
exactly.
having to do it as live action rather than CGI.
Yeah, I think like if you were really gonna do it, like CGI wouldn't be a bad way to go. Um, but it would be super expensive, and uh, I mean, it's pretty incredible. I think one dude made the stuff that I'm talking about. It's like 20 minutes long tops, but like one guy just made it on his own, did all the sound design, and it's like top level quality. Like you, if it came out of Hollywood, you'd be like, "Yep, that sounds about right." Um, but yeah, I think start with something more relatable and then build into it. Sort of like you start with Tony Stark and then you have the Marvel universe kind of falls out of that.
That remains my favorite, even though they've had all the others. That is still my favorite of the films because it is, well, partially because it's the start and partially because you see him develop from a spoilt brat into somebody who actually cares.
Yeah, he's got a good story arc. It's not too much to absorb in one go. That's always my concern when people start talking about like Warhammer stuff. Is like, and it was the same with The Witcher. You know, you had these wonderful books that were turned into games, that then they turned into a TV series, and it kind of, I don't know, I feel like it missed the mark because there's so much context that they miss. Like there's so much politics in The Witcher, and when they came out with that series, they just kind of they hinted at it. They got mired down in it in places it didn't need to be, and then they missed it for parts where they should have. Um, I feel like it.
Well, wasn't that one of the issues that Cavill had with it?
Wow, shit, I don't know. But I didn't read any of his interviews on like why he ain't The Witcher anymore. But certainly, I think this it's the same with any beloved franchise. As soon as you try and make something cool out of it, there's always diehard fans who could say this isn't exactly how I imagined it from when I read the books. You know?
Yeah, that person doesn't look exactly like the character. Have to be honest, I did that with Harry Potter.
Yep. Yep.
I
Absolutely.
did that exactly when they cast the girl playing Luna Lovegood. It was like, "No, that's not Luna."
Yep. Game of Thrones was the same for me. I thought Rob Stark was too much of a kind of Ponzi, you know, didn't fit the bill for me. I mean, they had some good casting, but same thing. I think you have to go into these things with an open mind. So fingers crossed, it does actually make it into production, and they do a good job of it. I'd love to see more people appreciate a sort of set of lore that I really enjoy.
And taking it more mainstream without ruining the original intent of the story.
Precisely, I think they need to keep it really brutal, really grimdark. I mean that is the whole thing with Warhammer. If they try and polish it up and put happy endings on things that shouldn't have had them, then they've totally missed the point of why people like it.
I think that's always the risk when something becomes popular or is made popular. There's always that risk that you are going to end up with a property that doesn't resemble the original.
Yeah, precisely. You need some kind of guardian. Games Workshop, some of their licensing has been very careful. Other times, it seems like they'll just whore it out to anyone, and so I think they would care. They hadn't quite finalized it. The fact that they're talking about it means they must be close. Yeah, exactly. I think that's pretty wise. The fact that they're talking about it, that they're in negotiations about it, is positive news for me as far as I'm concerned. But um, I think the Warhammer fans have been burnt before. There was going to be, in fact, who was it? Um, oh, it's going to drive me mad. I couldn't remember his name when I was trying to tell Lorraine, but there was a guy who voiced Eisenhorn, and they were going to come out with an Eisenhorn TV series, and it never happened. And so this is why I was
Were they going to make him a gumshoe?
no, I'm trying to remember who the hell was it? Um, I'll remember at 3 in the morning when I've gone to sleep. I'll be,
Yeah,
it was
that's
that
always
guy.
the way.
But yeah,
The funny thing is, I searched for Eisenhorn, and it actually came up with Eisenhorn TV series.
yep, exactly. So there's there there was supposed to be that. I don't think it ever made it. So Mark Strong voiced Eisenhorn in a
Oh, he
game
was
series. Yeah, Mark Strong's been in loads of stuff.
yeah,
So
he was
like
in it's gonna drive me nuts. He
Kingsman.
normally plays the bad guy, that's it, but he normally plays the bad guy in most things.
Yeah, which is why he's a good fit for the Warhammer universe. But yeah, he's been in lots of stuff, and done lots of voice work in games as well. But there was a lot of people that thought maybe he would play him in the TV series as well because he already was familiar with it. Um, and yeah, he's been in sort of spy things like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and Kingsman and so on. So I think he kind of fits that kind of thing. He also voiced a much beloved character in a very popular video game from 2011 called Space Marine, which has a sequel coming out this year that is hotly anticipated because it actually captures what Space Marine stuff is about, which is one versus 100 kind of odds and just tearing things in half.
That sounds like the sort of game you need to play over Christmas.
Oh yeah, for sure. Uh, but no, I'll be playing that this coming year. That's for sure. But yeah,
I'm still working my way through Assassin's Creed Odyssey.
all right. Well, yeah, I will definitely send you some videos to try and help you contextualize the universe a little bit,
Yeah,
and
I
hopefully that
think
will spur
that's
you
it.
to read the rest of the Eisenhorn books.
Yeah, because I wasn't familiar with it, I know that when I first started it, my brain was, what's happening? I'm confused. Who are these people? Because obviously the universe hadn't been built. But the more I read in there, as I said, I gathered the religious context, the secularity, the politics and everything else. It started to feed in the further I got into the book. It didn't start off being clear, but it did start to get there was more clarity as I finished it.
Yeah, I think that any of the books, like none of the books are going to start you off and be like, okay, let me explain all of the context. You have to kind of start somewhere, and so it just takes you in, and you start to pick things up from context, and then before you know it, you're away. And I like the Eisenhorn books because you encounter all these things and they're new to you, and because they're from the perspective of a person, they're all quite big and scary and impactful. Whereas when you read them in the Horus Heresy, they're often from the perspective of a space marine to whom things are a lot less scary. So it's it kind of gives you a bit more of a kind of shock and awe experience when you deal with some of the bigger things in the universe, like Titans and Space Marines.
Which is good. So, would you say that this is the book for people who aren't familiar with it to start with because you
I
started
think
with it
so.
or because it is the best book?
Not because I started with it. It is often recommended as the starting place by other readers of the Warhammer books because it touches on a lot of elements in the universe. Um, so I do recommend it from that perspective. And then if you like the universe, then kick off with the Horus Heresy and start really getting stuck into understanding everything and who everyone is, and before you know it, you'll be 50 books deep. But yeah, I think it's like a good taster. It's 3 books, most people can handle that. And if you find yourself wanting more, then either get stuck into the Horus Heresy if you want to get into the world of Space Marine stuff, or if you like more of that, then you can start off on the Ravenor series or the Bequin series, depending on, you know, who your favorite character was.
So, it's a good taster
Yeah,
rather than here's an entire universe, get stuck in and don't feel intimidated.
yeah, it's a small window into it, and you kind of touch on a lot of elements, so you can see, okay, that was kind of cool. I liked that. If you're like, holy shit, Titans are amazing. I like the idea of 100-meter tall walking battle robots, then okay, maybe reading the Mechanicum books is cool, and you should totally pick up on that. If you like all the politics and shit, read more Inquisition books. If you think Space Marines are really rad and you liked the fighting scenes, go read some Space Marine shit. So you can kind
Is
of
there a
watch from there.
guide for all of
Oh
this?
yeah, yeah. There's like wikis and forums and subreddits and galore. You can't really go far on the internet without finding a Warhammer community that will point you in the right
In that
direction.
case, I will post a link. I'll post a link to one below because I think I should have probably looked at it.
Yeah, I can send you a link to the wiki.
That'd be really helpful. It was an interesting book, though. It's very, very different to anything I've read. As I said, I read Brendan Sanderson from his Cytonic series earlier this year, and I don't tend to touch my toe very often into science fiction. I tend to steer more on the fantasy sci-fi side of things, and far more the comedy fantasy sci-fi side of things.
Yeah, the only other recommendation I might give to your listeners, if you want something that feels a little bit less sci-fi, um, is the Gaunt's Ghost series, also written by Dan Abnett. It's much more World War II kind of feel to it. You follow a company um, of guard commandos, um, and their exploits as they get shuttled around in the meat grinder of the 40k war fronts. And that's a really cool book, really well written. Actually, it's like 7 or 8 books long, um, but yeah, that's another really good one. That's like got some of my favorite stuff. Some of the great characters in that.
That's always a thing though, isn't it? There is always a risk when you get into a universe that there are multiple books in a single series that will explain a specific point in time, especially if you're talking about thousands of years.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's it. Goes back to what I was saying before. Like, no matter what you like to read, like, there's probably an element of it in the Warhammer universe. So, like, you can find your niche. A lot of people love the Guard because they're all human characters with all the same human frailties and feelings, and they're really relatable characters in quite relatable situations. Uh, they're all digging trenches and up against pretty bad odds. So, uh, some of the things I described earlier, they're out there fighting them, just dudes with laser pistols and stuff. But so yeah, there's lots of good starting places. Probably Eisenhorn or Gaunt's Ghost if you kind of want something a little bit more, uh, army sort of feel to it.
And then of course you've got all the fantasy characters that go in there with the orcs and the elves and everything else, which is
Yeah.
great.
There is also a Warhammer Fantasy universe. It's not to throw
Of
that into
course.
the mix. So if you like, kind of more fantasy elves or like, magic and things like that, then the Warhammer Fantasy universe exists. Then you've got your dwarves and all that kind of stuff that you'd expect to see there. I haven't read much of that, but I hear it's very good. I'm more the grim dark, I like the
Yeah.
the gray, desolate world that the Warhammer 40k universe paints.
That's not a bad thing. Everybody has their niche, I suppose. But thank you ever so much. It's actually given me a really good insight into the books and what I can see in them that obviously only reading one part of it hasn't given me the full expanse of the universe and how it develops. So it's been really, really helpful. And it's hopefully going to get more people to go, oh, I'd never heard of those books, which is kind of where I was a few weeks ago.
All right, cool. Well, thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure. Nobody ever asked me to talk about Warhammer because they know what will happen when I start. So apologies for anyone. But hopefully you'll give it a crack, and then you'll be boring people about Warhammer in no time.
There you go. It's books. What more can we say? Just go out and pick up one trilogy. It's not a case of go up and pick up one book, it's one trilogy. But thanks ever so much for sharing because it's always good to hear from someone who loves the universe they're talking about.
Well, that I do.
Yeah. Thanks, Dev.
All right, thanks very much, Ray. Bye.
Bye. Well, that's it for this week, and actually that's it for 2022. Thank you for listening. If you like what you hear, why not share it with your friends and family? And please post a star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on any of the other podcatchers you might use. You can follow me on Twitter at being_bookish and on Instagram at beingbookishpod, where I post a lot of images of the books I'm reading and my bookcase as it stands. Or you can check out my website, beingbookish.co.uk. I'll be back with a review of 2022 on the 2nd of January. So however you celebrate or whatever you're doing, have a wonderful week and I'll see you in 2023. So until next time, this is me saying farewell.